I'll never forget the first time I heard mention of the Camino de Santiago. When I heard about it, I knew I had to do it. And not long after, I walked the pilgrimage in Spain, and it changed my life. And as a result, I've gone back several times, taking groups, and every time I go back, the Camino is different. Whether it's the different groups that bring a different energy, whether it's because the Camino has changed or whether I have changed, walking the Camino is a ritual, something that has called pilgrims back for centuries because of the intrinsic power it holds. It's an ageless, eternal experience, yet something that grounds one in the here and now. This video covers the Camino that I did in the summer of 2022 when I worked with the archetype of the sun, Sol Invictus. It's a very small and brief glimpse of that vast journey that the Camino is, a personal experience that I'd like to share with you along this magical path. I've done the Camino about 16 times and it keeps calling me back. There's definitely an energy here. It's from another dimension, another time. It's a timeless place. But more than that, what fascinates me is what made millions of people do this pilgrimage, not only in post-Christian times, but in pre-Christian times. And of course, the Camino follows the Milky Way to the westmost point of Spain and in fact continental Europe. So there was a deep understanding that this is a special place. It takes one to the end of the earth, takes one to the end of self, and therefore death, with the implication that walking back home, as pilgrims had to do in old times, walking back is walking back into life, walking back into a new way of living and doing things, and in that sense perhaps having the redemption of a spiritual death which allows a spiritual rebirth. The Camino is incredibly beautiful physically, it's mystical, and of course it's a stage for us to rehearse becoming something new, to let go of the past, let go of the old emotional blockages or habits that tie us into a particular way of living. So in this place, this sacred place, this interdimensional place, we can rehearse becoming something new, so that by the time we go back home, we've practiced it, and the body, the subconscious mind, already has an experience and a taste of what it means to be more our true self, as opposed to the conditioned self that we started out as. And on this Camino, the process that I run, we work with archetypes and we work with the hero's journey, the story of the hero's journey of going out of the known into the unknown and bringing back a treasure or a holy grail that allows us to be transformed and our lives to be transformed. So I'm in the city of Leon in Castile, and this is day one of my Camino, and this place, this cathedral, is such a powerhouse of energy. Like all churches, they were built on top of older temples or older natural power points, and this cathedral is just magnificent in its sacred geometry, in its esoteric symbolism, and of course in the beautiful art that is present here. So this is a very fitting place to take these first steps on this exciting journey, in which I really hope to walk with the energy of the sun, the Sol Invictus, the invincible sun that is reborn every day as well as every year. Central to this process that I run is choosing of an archetype, which could be a god, goddess, a historical figure, or someone who means something to the participant. And then walking this archetype for the 3 weeks of the Camino helps us integrate this energy while following the story of the hero's journey, which inevitably the mythological story of the archetype follows. Today, I've been reflecting on the sun, of course, because that is my theme, how to embody that light, how to walk that light more into my life. But of course, that light is sterile without the earth. It's sterile without the water that feeds it. And interestingly, this Cathedral of Lyon was built on the ruins of an ancient Roman bath. And always those ancient springs and fountains were considered sacred because that was an expression of the earth's fertility springing forth and allowing life to flourish. After a time of preparation in Lyon, we choose our archetypes and then start walking, sleeping first in Manzarife and then in Hospital de Orbigo. So the Camino really isn't only about the actual walk and the physical experience of the Camino. It's also another dimension, a sacred dimension. And of course, the sacred dimension was enhanced by the constructions that were built in different power points in this land. And much like the Incas and other ancient civilizations, the natural energies were taken and then enhanced by these constructions. So these constructions hold the energy, and of course the stones hold these energies for thousands of years. With these signposts in place, we are able to interact, doesn't matter in what era, but we're able to interact with these timeless sacred energies. And certainly they become very tangible. It's almost like walking, and the physical exhaustion takes us into a different state of consciousness, a light trance in which we can access our bodies, in which we can access our deeper emotions, always for healing and transformation, because that is why the Camino and other sacred pilgrimages are created. It's because they hold the promise as well as the space for transformation. And after 2 days of walking, the full experience of the Camino really sets in. It's as if the walking starts to get one into an altered state of consciousness. And this is partially because the body's tired, the ego's weaker, and very much also interacting with the energy of the Camino. So this first phase is one of a little bit of tiredness, but great joy, great pleasure, great appreciation of being here. Of course, afterwards it does become a little bit more difficult and the other challenges start to surface. But definitely being here in Astorga from Lyon is a real feeling of celebration, of the Camino, of being alive, of just really enjoying the abundance and the beauty of this landscape also that unfolds along this journey. Today is day 4 of walking, and we start to enter the mountains now. And I've just been doing some walking meditation, and it's incredible how everything just feels like one. Everything feels connected, and definitely the spirit of the Camino is discernible. This is the process of walking one's talk. This is the process of taking the intention, the prayer, which is held on the breath, which is related to the element of air, and then walking that into the body. So really merging the two kind of opposite aspects of ourselves as humans. And of course later I realized that the body might take some strain, a lot more, but even through that strain we find transmutation as the intention becomes to merge with higher mind. About 70 kilometers after Lyon, about 20 kilometers after Astorga, the pilgrim enters the mountains, or the beginning of the mountains, where there are these beautiful stone villages that have been preserved and renovated in recent years, but that have so much charm and really have a very otherworldly, ethereal feel, especially given the fact that they're in the mountains. And the mountains, of course, being energy holders, guardians, that hold the deeper mysteries for the pilgrim and otherwise. Part of the challenge of the Camino, of course, is the physical aspect, but one of the lessons is following one's devotion and dedication to break through the temptation to give up, and therefore to continue to work with a higher prayer or a higher intention, having walked one's talk in reaching the destination, Santiago. We no longer have to have the doubts or the feeling of incompletion that the mind, the mental aspect, very often brings up. From Rabanal, we are now going to the Cruz de Hierro, which in very ancient times was an altar to Mercury, and in medieval history it was a place where pilgrims dropped a stone, usually a very big stone, representing the sins that they wish to leave behind on this pilgrimage. So from here it goes into the mountains, really spectacular scenery, and this ritual of dropping the stone is a very important ritual within Camino folklore. And in modern times, the way I like to work with this energy of the Cruz, the cross, is for this to represent the past that one is leaving behind. And if done with consciousness and intention, it really is a very powerful ritual of renewal and preparing oneself for the last 2 weeks of the Camino before reaching Santiago, where one can really walk for those last 2 weeks the new person one is becoming, really rehearsing this new personality transformation that one wishes to integrate. As I walk today in the rain, after having dropped my stone at the cross and influenced by a recent trip to Peru, I realized that my big intention is to find and live paradise on earth. And I think there's little doubt that we create hell on earth for ourselves through our fears, our anxieties, our doubts. And apart from that inner world that creates a hell, of course there's a lot of hellish experiences in the world out there. And I find it very interesting that the ancients, all societies, had mythological cities, golden mountains, paradises on earth that people aspire to, a golden age. And I'm hoping that what that involves to reach those golden mountains and golden cities is to align ourselves with the frequency of those places, of those mythical places, so that we can become citizens of those golden cities. And I certainly think that, walking this Camino is a way to start putting that frequency into our bodies and into our consciousness. I hurt my foot before coming on the Camino, and that of course was hugely frustrating, and it has limited my ability to walk with ease quite a lot. And of course there's always a lesson with this, especially when it comes to walking the Camino. One of them is being present in the moment, but also for me it's been about taking it slowly, and in taking it a little bit slower I've been able to feel the energy of the Camino better. And certainly within a few kilometers of walking, just enter that power of nature, the love, the stillness, the quiet of being here. And I think that is the real gift of the Camino, is the fact that we have time for ourselves in quiet. There's always a lesson in whatever comes up. Issues from the outside world coming in are telling us something. Obviously walking through our own pain or difficulty or limitations or resistances also are a huge lesson. But we have this container of nature, this container of the Camino itself, what it represents, the spiritual devotion that it represents. So we give ourselves the space to be able to let that percolate, let that be resolved, so that we can come to a place of greater resolution, connection to the divine. And I really think the lesson of the Camino is to reconnect to the divine, of course, but to do it in a tangible way, in a physical way, so that the message, the forgiveness, the shift, the transformation is felt in the body. And when we get it in the body, we then can live it in our lives afterwards. And that's why for me the Camino is an absolute initiation into a new life. I always see the Camino as kind of the doorway into something new. Today I kind of woke up in my stuff, heavy, and as I've been walking, I've just realized again the power of getting out of our issues. First of all is a choice. It's a choice to not engage with those issues or those heavinesses. And then secondly, this lifetime is about living, experiencing, but doing so without attachment. And of course that's a very big challenge. But the more we attach within this lifetime, the more difficult it becomes to release, to let go when we die. And possibly the moment of death, which is the ultimate release, is the purpose of our lives. To have had this experience, then to let go and to enter the vastness with consciousness and with lightness. I guess we need to become more like the four elements. Perhaps, our earth body makes us want to attach, but then we have the flow of water, the flow of air, the consuming nature of fire that releases the heaviness of the earth, that brings other aspects into the earth so that the earth can be transmuted into something else. Maybe in the beginning, the element of earth in our lives is the illusion that we become more solid and stronger. But then beyond that, the elements start to erode and start to transmute that heavy earth into something else. And there's nothing we can do about it. Nothing on earth is permanent. It's encoded in the very nature, the very basics of this reality, to not attach. Of course, the four elements are a beautiful way of understanding the structure of this reality. But the four elements are nothing without the fifth element, which is ether, which is spirit, which gives form to nature. And the cross is the representation of the four elements, the four directions. And then the fifth element is Christ or Dionysius on the cross, and the resurrection, the rebirth that comes after being stuck on the cross, being stuck in the four elements, is the real message of transformation, transmutation, and hope. Because despite our imprisonment in the four elements or our experience in the four elements, there is a rebirth, there's a way out, which is either death at the end of our lives, or otherwise it's some form of transmutation, going beyond, which is very much a mystery and probably the big question that all humans have contemplated through the ages. tonight we're sleeping in the town of Las Herrerias, which is in the mountains and with streams flowing from all directions. And it is, of course, a perfect place to do water breath work. And doing breath work in the cold, ice cold water is a perfect way to have a spiritual rebirth. This soul kind of leaves the body given the very intense cold, and it's quite incredible to see how people get exactly what they need. It's a space of great vulnerability. It brings up a lot of fear, but people get exactly what they need in their healing. And for me personally, it was a very profound experience of feeling healing energy pulse up and down my body. My foot has been a bit of a challenge on this trip, and I really just feel a healing taking place. And one of the other insights I had was just a great sense of the power that we all have in us. We just need to get out of our stories. And that's something I've been reflecting on the whole day. It's not only about letting go, but it's also very much about choosing our emotions. We can choose to be sad, or we can choose to observe that sadness and not get caught in the narrative that may have been the cause of the sadness, but that we often love to tell ourselves. Into the archetypal country roads in the forest, which are one of the most beautiful parts of the Camino. But being in the mountains here just makes one feel closer to the divine, more in connection with nature, and really in an other world. It's as if these country roads are passages through time and into the other world. And in our hero's journey process that we're doing on this Camino, we're starting to approach the underworld and the deep aspect of this initiation process. I'm approaching Cebreiro now, which is one of the highest points of the Camino, and it really is a magnificent village. Apart from that, it also has what has been called, and what the church has kind of certified to be, a holy grail, or a cup of mystery that has performed miracles. So that makes me think that here in Cebreiro, high in the mountains, there is something very sacred and a very powerful energy of healing, and definitely another one of those initiations before reaching the end of the world, Finisterre, Santiago. I find it fascinating how the early peoples identified sacred places, maybe on a spring or at a very interesting or powerful natural formation, and then they would have built a shrine, which eventually became a temple, and then eventually became replaced by a church. And the fact that Cebreiro has this church which holds the Holy Grail, for me, is a real clue that this is very important on a spiritual level. And another interesting thing about Cebreiro is the fact that the village is very Celtic. The buildings are circular in shape, and even though they've been reconstructed, they have preserved something very ancient, something very mysterious. Here above the mountains of Cebreiro, it really is magnificent. This is such an exceptional place, and it just really is so uplifting to have this 360-degree view of the countryside around us, of the Camino, to have such an expanded experience of freedom on this sacred road. Arriving in Samos is like that mythological experience of walking through the wilderness and reaching the mythological city, the golden city, the magical place, Temenos, that is holding higher wisdom. And although Samos itself might not have been necessarily a place that held this higher wisdom, it reminds me of some of those sacred places and cities like Machu Picchu and Shangri-La perhaps. And it really is something very powerful and important and necessary in the human psyche to have these mythological cities or have a golden age to look back to. And I really do believe that this is something that is deeply held in our subconscious minds, because at one stage we did have these golden cities, these places of great wisdom, perhaps great healing centers, great temples, places of great spiritual connection. I think in many ways in the modern world these have been compromised or destroyed, and something like the Camino, which is not one particular place but it's something that spans thousands of kilometers, is a place that's removed, a place that is in the other world. It's very much in this world, and maybe that's how it gets disguised, and maybe that's why it can continue to survive, but it does still hold that eternal energy and frequency of higher light and higher consciousness. And when we walk it, we participate in it, and we receive downloads as a result. In these forest roads, you can really feel how the road itself holds the power and the energy of the Camino. The magic here is so palpable, it's so alive, and walking through it allows us to participate in that magic and for it to become a visceral part of our being. Today on the hero's journey, we're walking the devil card, which represents the beast or the monster or the guardian that looks after the treasure or the Holy Grail. And of course, this devil represents the things in our lives that we make bigger than ourselves, the things in our lives that seem insurmountable. And very often our own beast is our emotions, the emotions of the ego, the emotions that we can't overcome, that dictate the way we experience our day or in whatever situation we may be. So getting to know that beast, seeing that beast, and then going beyond it is the real way of overcoming our pettiness, our ego, and our issues. Choosing and being conscious of our emotions is the art of allowing the observer within us to expand our consciousness, and then to look back in on ourselves, back in on the ego, and from there to really ask ourselves, is this my truth? Is this emotion I'm feeling today real? Or am I indulging myself in some way? So the power of engaging that observer, expanding consciousness, is that we can really change the quality of our day-to-day experience. We don't need to get so hooked in and involved with ourselves and our small emotions. I started off my day walking through some of the things that I feel I need to forgive myself for, because I think ultimately forgiveness is the way to get beyond the beast. Giving it away, forgiveness. And then I really went into those emotions and felt them and felt some of the regrets or the stupidity of my past. And then as one walks with it in that context of forgiving it, eventually it reaches a point of great liberation and release. Here in Barbadelo, we symbolically face the demon, the beast, the guardian of the hero's journey. And this is what we need to fight in order to achieve the Holy Grail. And of course, this Holy Grail is already within us. We just need to bring it into light, to bring it into awareness, so that we can fully feel it and live it and experience it. But it's our inner struggles, it's our doubts, it's our fears that keep us out. So we need to overcome that beast within ourselves so that we can fully live the Holy Grail, fully live in the garden of paradise. And it's a hard struggle. It's probably the hardest struggle. But when we do symbolic ritual practices of releasing that aspect within us that resists, we are able to overcome it. We are able to take the very literal, practical, physical steps to make it possible. That is the power of ritual and prayer, and of course walking the Camino. One of the reasons why the Camino is so effective in bringing about emotional healing is the fact that the body becomes tired, therefore the ego becomes tired. And when we have the tools to work with the ego, to observe the ego, we can really make very big spiritual breakthroughs. And of course, in that regard, nature and the sacred places along the way are support in this process of personal growth. So today my body is very tired, and also there are only a few days left of the Camino, so one starts to think ahead and think of what needs to be done later on. For me, the lesson with this is to just really stay in the moment. Definitely at the beginning of the Camino, there's a very beautiful sense of entering a safe space and a cocoon for a long period of time. But the thing always to remember is that the Camino is like a jewel or a beacon of light that is created along our path of life. And the 3 weeks or whatever amount of time one spends on the Camino is the time to nurture and cultivate that light. And then when we go back into the world along our timeline of life, that jewel or that beacon continues to burn bright, and it continues to mark a transition from the old you into the new you. So this is an extended process of really wiping the slate and making new things possible. Arriving in Portomarin after all the years of seeing a very large lake and dam, this dam was empty and one could see the remnants of the old bridges and the old city, and that ties in very much with going into the underworld. And it was kind of a coincidence this time, and it was also a very beautiful metaphor of the impermanence of things, how things change, and at the same time of the underworld itself, the underworld being uncovered and shown up. Today we'll be going to another ruined city, which is Castro Mayor, an ancient pre-Roman Celtic settlement, which is very enigmatic and powerful, and once again reminds me of that principle of the mythological cities and the ideal golden age that they represent. Often on the Camino it rains, of course, or one walks through a very dense bank of clouds, and it really feels like one is entering deep mystery or another dimension. And I find it very useful in the process of walking to see, let's say, these storms or the mist as gateways into new states of consciousness, or gateways into something different within ourselves. So the walking process becomes very dynamic and a real inner process that is expressed or reflected outwardly. We are now about 30 kilometers from Santiago, and no longer the long introspective walks, and now it becomes a time of excitement, a lot of anticipation. People are really feeling the energy. The first time I did the Camino, I couldn't find accommodation in one of the middle towns, so I ended up walking 40 kilometers. But the energy was so palpable, and the sense of flow, a river pushing one forward, was really great. And definitely now, as we get close, I can feel that energy again. that anticipation of reaching Santiago, and the joy of tangibly reaching one's destination. Of course, the Camino is not about the destination, it's the journey, but reaching the destination does give a certain payoff. And that does give the subconscious mind, the body, the message that we've attained the goal. And that is so important in terms of ritual, to find closure to a process. And in this case, all the walking and then reaching the destination is incredibly important. Reaching Santiago is always incredibly powerful and emotional, especially the approach to the archway that leads into the main square of the cathedral. So for me, this is really the culmination of the experience, the culmination of the Camino. In the square, there is, first of all, the absolute harmony and beauty of the place, but the sacredness, the joy of pilgrims arriving is absolutely palpable. Reaching Santiago is only the beginning of the journey, and of course in the Middle Ages and before, people used Santiago as a stepping point to Finisterre, the end of the earth, and the end of the Milky Way, symbolically speaking, which then meant a journey of return to one's home and to take the Holy Grail that one has achieved through the pilgrimage back to one's life in order for that life to be transformed. The Camino is a miracle, and that's why I keep going back. This was my best one ever. Maybe it's because I hadn't been back for 3 years. Maybe it's because I've done work on myself in the meantime. But there's something about the Camino that always changes. It's always different. Some years I see things that I never see again. Other years, physical monuments that were very important have completely changed. An example being the Portomarin dam that disappeared, as well as the Monte de Gozo sculpture, a kind of hideous 80s sculpture that was also taken away. Just like in Shakespeare's Hamlet, where the protagonist has to produce a play in order to find the truth about his father's murder, a play within the play. If we assume that this reality is an illusion, then the Camino is an illusion within the illusion that allows us to find the truth. This finding of the truth, this taking a step back from reality, which allows us to see ourselves as we really are, to take a step back from our lives in order to reflect and to make a space to connect with the divine.